What's up, BookTube? It's Jimmy, and today we're going to do a book haul video. I know we just did a book haul 2 videos ago, but in my defense, it's been 2 months actually since I bought any books. I went almost 2 months without buying any books. So I was due, and I was out on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I went on a hike, and then afterwards, as one does, I went to 2 of my favorite used bookstores in the area, and I picked up a boatload of books. I'm talking an absolute stack. And you can see I have an absolute stack here. We have 11 books. Some of these were pretty foolish purchases. We're going to put this down. Some of them I had good reasons for, but let's get into it. A lot of the books I bought on this haul were sort of dusty old canonical classics, so I'll go through that group first. First up, we have a book from a writer who should need no introduction. This is Jane Austen's novel, Northanger Abbey. I believe this was first published posthumously in like 1816 or 1815. From what I know about it, it's sort of a satire or a send-up of the Gothic genre of novels that was very popular at the time. I've only read a few. In college, I read The Castle of Otranto, and then The Mysteries of Udolpho, and I believe this is sort of a send-up of those sort of Gothic novels where you have heroines in romantic locations, in old castles, and spooky happenings. I think this book is sort of a parody of that style. But I've been on a I've been on a bit of a Jane Austen kick this year. I read Persuasion a few months ago, and I really enjoyed that book. Last month, I read Sense and Sensibility, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And I've also been listening to, since last month, Steve Donahue's read-along of Pride and Prejudice. And all of that has gotten me so hyped up about Jane Austen. I want to read more and more of her. I'm hoping I get to read all of her novels by the end of next year. So this is probably going to be going next on my Jane Austen reading list. Her novel, Northanger Abbey. I'm really excited to get into this one. Next up, we have a bit of a twofer. This is 2 novels from the great Victorian writer George Eliot. We have her novel Middlemarch, which is sort of considered her magnum opus, and then another novel from her that is, I was about to call it a lesser work, but you can see it's quite chunky. This is Daniel Deronda. Let's get into Middlemarch first. Now, Middlemarch. This is a book that I really did not have any excuse to buy. I read it last year, and I already have a physical copy of it. But I don't love my physical copy, and this is my favorite read of 2023. This book is so darn good, but it's really hard to explain why it's good. It makes someone interested in it. It was first, I think, written and published in 1869 or 1870, but George Eliot set it 35 years prior, during a time in Britain called the Reformation, where people were rethinking politics and rethinking religious freedom at the time. So this book is sort of set in a period of change in Britain, and it follows the lives of a number of people in this town of Middlemarch, this sleepy provincial town. George Eliot packs this book with so much detail about the time period, about the lives of people in it, that it really feels like you're in the world of Middlemarch. There's discussions about, like I said earlier, the political situation of the time, the religious situation, religious ideas of the time, but also about scientific ideas, about medical ideas, about agricultural ideas, about money at the time. It's so good. There's so much going on in this book. This is like an everything book. At the same time, she has these wonderfully drawn out and interesting and complex and changing characters all throughout the book. And they all have these separate storylines that eventually meet up as the sort of underlying story of the book becomes clear over the course of this long novel. It's masterfully done, and it's just an amazing world to inhabit for the month or 2 that you'll be reading this. This is an absolutely wonderful book. Totally recommend it to anybody who has a taste for, slower, old fiction. I don't know how much modern readers who are used to really zippy, snappy fiction will enjoy this. But if you have a taste for, sinking into a book over the course of a number of longer reads, you will love Middlemarch. Amazing book. Then we have Daniel Deronda. This novel, I believe, was written later than Middlemarch, and it's not as well known, but I have heard its name in criticism and in reviews before, so like there is some appreciation of this book still. I haven't even read the back of it, so I don't know what it's about, but it is a Penguin classic that is in almost new condition, so you gotta get these when you're interested. And then also the name, Daniel Deronda, is very intriguing. You know, that alliterative name. I like something about it. It sounds cool. It makes you wonder what's going on with it. So I'll probably get to this, to be honest, maybe next year. I'm not sure how many more big novels I have in me. I'm currently in the middle of a couple of doozies right now. So we'll get to this when we get to it. But I was happy to pick this up. Next up is yet another dusty canonical classic. This is William Faulkner's novel, I think from 1929, The Sound and the Fury. In a very nice modern library hardcover with an introduction by the great contemporary American writer Marilynne Robinson. And the edition and the introduction were kind of what pushed me into getting this. I read this about a decade ago. I don't remember too much about it, to be honest with you. The general gist of the story is we're seeing sort of the downfall of a once prosperous white Southern family post-Civil War. And we're seeing how that family has failed to adjust in the new landscape. I do remember, though, that there's some really striking writing in here. There's a very famous section in this book where Faulkner writes from the perspective of a character named Benji, who he can't speak and he has basically learning disabilities. So we're seeing the narrative in this confused, mute perspective, which is a pretty interesting stylistic technique. I've had a bit of a hankering to come back to this and to read a little bit more Faulkner. I've only read this and Absalom, and I've liked both a lot, but I really haven't read a whole lot of Faulkner. So we'll be getting into this probably actually pretty soon. So this is The Sound and the Fury. Our next book is yet another canonical classic, but I would never call this one dusty or old. This is Virginia Woolf's 1928 novel, Orlando. And you can see it's a movie tie-in cover. That's Tilda Swinton on the front cover. I normally don't like movie tie-in covers, but I actually really, really enjoyed the film adaptation of this. Tilda Swinton's amazing in it, and it's shot incredibly beautifully. It's a very cool adaptation. But this was my introduction to Virginia Woolf. I read this my freshman year of college in my second semester in a second semester literature class, and I had never read anyone who wrote like Virginia Woolf until then. I thought it was an absolutely amazing experience, and this is a book that I kept thinking about throughout the years, even though it took me over a decade to reread the book. This is a book that I just kept thinking about and coming back to in my mind. Rereading it a few years ago, it just cemented how great this book was and how much I loved it. So I needed to get a hard copy of it. The basic gist of this book is we're sort of following the life of a Elizabethan nobleman, Orlando. Orlando is a sort of very romantic youth with ideas of being a poet. He's been working on this poem forever. And it's why we find out that Orlando just stops aging and starts living forever once he reaches a certain age. And then very famously, Orlando has a marked change in the middle of this book. He goes to bed one night and then wakes up a couple days later, a woman. And so now we see Orlando's completely changed perspective on life and on the world. And we see from her eyes, a lot of cutting social commentary about the place of women in the world. But this is not just a book about sexual politics or gender roles. This is a book about the passage of time. It's about art. It's about literature. It's beautifully, fluidly written. No one can write like Virginia Woolf. She knows how to just make incredible sentences that flow and give you the sense of someone's mind and the wanderings of your mind. And it's also extremely funny. She's extremely witty. So this is a fantastic book. I absolutely love it. I would recommend this to anybody. Orlando. Virginia Woolf's Orlando. Amazing book. I love this. Next up, we have yet another canonical work. This time from a name who, if you're from my neck of the woods, southeastern Pennsylvania, you should be pretty familiar with. Walt Whitman, who is not only a bridge that takes you from Philly to South Jersey, he's also one of the great American poets. And this is his collection, Leaves of Grass, which he first published in 1855, but added on to it throughout the years. And this modern library edition has all those editions. This is like the final, quote-unquote, deathbed edition. Now, I've been on a bit of a mission this year to vary my reading diet a little bit. I've subsisted mostly on fiction, but I'm trying to re-add a little bit of nonfiction and poetry into my reading. And this is a name that keeps popping up. And I read in high school, like I think probably a lot of people my age, little bits of Song of Myself, his very famous long poem, but I never really read any more than that. And so I wanted to sort of expand my knowledge of American poetry. I'm about 100 pages into this book, and I'm really enjoying it so far. Whitman has a really strong and spirited voice as a poet. The long poem Song of Myself, which is around 70-ish pages, is absolutely wonderful. It's all about being a person in the world and accepting that oneness with the world, and accepting everything that's beautiful and everything that feels good, all that sensuality, but it's also accepting about the tragedy, the hardship, death even. One of the techniques he uses in this, he has long lists of people and experiences. And reading it, I got so much of a sense of the life and the optimism and the struggle of America in the 19th century. Whitman is really, really, I think, overwhelmed with a sense of the greatness of the American experiment. And it's very cool to read. I'm having way more fun reading this than I thought I would. And this book also has an introduction by William Carlos Williams, who is a poet I like. I read him in college, and I just finished reading a collection of his earlier this month. So picking this up, I'm really glad I did. But yeah, Leaves of Grass, Walt Whitman. So we'll be reading more of this throughout the next month. Now, next up, we are finally out of the classics. However, we're going to follow the trail. This is another work of poetry. This is John Ashbery's Girls on the Run, a poem. And you see this is a nice hardcover with an interesting cover. This is one long poem, apparently inspired by the works of an outsider artist, Henry Darger, who I believe this is his art on the cover. John Ashbery is a poet that I really, really like at times. And then other times I completely bounce off of his work. He's very, very strange, very obscure, but he's often extremely funny. And his imagery is also so weird and so evocative at times. So I kind of liken reading Ashbery to your mind is wandering through a very strange and sometimes sad playground. When I see a nice Ashbery book at a used store, I tend to pick him up. I do like his writing quite a bit at times, even though sometimes it does bounce off of me. But this is John Ashbery's Girls on the Run. Next up, we have something completely different. This is a contemporary novel from 2018. This is Lisa Halliday's Asymmetry. This book got put on my radar because Lisa Halliday is apparently a protege of a writer that I really, really liked. That's Philip Roth. And this novel apparently draws on some of her experiences working with Philip Roth years ago. From what I gather about it, there's sort of two separate and distinct halves that come together in this book. We have a first story about an older male writer and a young woman editor who's working with him. And then a second story about an Iraqi American who gets detained on a trip. And somehow these two separate storylines come together. I don't know too much more about this, and I think this book got a lot of buzz at the time, though I haven't heard anyone really talk about it at all, so I don't really have super high expectations for it. But I wanted to read it because of the connection it has with a writer I really enjoy. One quick side note about this, I really cannot stand this trend in sort of contemporary novels of having these weird, like, partial covers and these inner flaps. I don't like it at all, but, you know, you see it all the time now. Alright, we just have 3 more books to go. Our next one is Gordon Dickson's 1967 novel in this cool little ace science fiction paperback, Soldier Astronaut. This is in his Dorsai series, which I believe is a very long-running series. I read one of the Dorsai books last month, a book called Dorsai with an exclamation point, and I actually really liked it. And this is apparently one of the best in the series. The basic premise of the Dorsai novels is that humans have split off into colonizing separate planets. You have a planet called Dorsai, where all the culture and society there has grown up around military training, and the people of the Dorsai act as mercenaries for the rest of humanity. So this takes place in that world and in that universe. I don't know anything else about it, but I've heard it's one of the best in the series. I've also heard that there are some really bad books in the series. So when I see one that's good for a reasonable price, I'll pick it up. But I'm not going to buy all of these and read all of them. So this is Soldier Astronaut, Gordon Dickson. Next up, we have a cool little Del Rey paperback. This is John Steinbeck's The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights, which, from what I gather, is John Steinbeck's sort of retelling of the Le Morte d'Arthur, of the King Arthur saga. I actually don't know if this is any good. I don't have a particular interest in Steinbeck's writing, but I do actually really enjoy King Arthur writing. When I was a kid, I carried around the Le Morte d'Arthur with me for a whole year and read it. I read The Once and Future King. I loved I loved Camelot, the musical. And I've been reading, last year I read The Once and Future King, and this year I've been reading Mary Stewart's Merlin trilogy. So when I saw some more King Arthur related, fiction, I was like, you know what, we'll jump in on this and we'll see if it's any good. I don't really have super high expectations for this book because it's not really widely discussed, but hey, maybe it'll surprise me. So, John Steinbeck's The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights. Next up, we have a collection, actually. This is the Big Book of Classic Fantasy, edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. And this is published by Vintage Books. It came out in 2019. I saw this, and it looked intriguing. But then I looked at the cover, and I looked at the table of contents. And this has got some huge names in it. You got Mary Shelley, Tolkien, Nabokov, Zora Neale Hurston, G.K. Hesterton. So, and you can see it's over 800 pages, and it's completely packed. You got double columns. So, I'm looking forward to diving into this. Probably in the fall. I haven't started picking it up yet. But the Big Book of Classic Fantasy. So, pretty excited by this find. This is something that I've never seen out in the wild. I know I just said that was my last book, and that was my last book from this particular shopping trip, but I did buy 2 other books this month. I picked up 2 more volumes of Xueqin's novel, The Story of the Stone, which I started reading a couple months ago. I've been loving it, but I finished the first volume, and so I had to keep on reading. I think the whole book together is 5 volumes, around 2,000 some pages, but I'm midway through the second volume, and I'm absolutely loving it. So, just a little bonus, we're reading The Story of the Stone by Xueqin as well. Well, that concludes my August book haul. Hopefully this video was a little snappier than my last couple. I found that I was getting really exhausted talking about the books, especially when you have a huge stack of books trying to talk about each one. It's actually harder than I thought it would be. So hopefully this one is a little breezier of a video. But if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I hope you're having a great reading month. I've been having a pretty enjoyable reading month myself. I haven't read as much as I want, but the reading I have been doing has been really good. I started reading... The first book I read this month I didn't love, but it got me reading some other works that I've been really enjoying. I've been reading Edith Wharton, I've been reading Virginia Woolf, and it's been great. It's made me think about some of the connections between some of these writers. hopefully I'll get into that in my next video I do, maybe next week. So thanks for sticking around. Have a great month, and see you next time.